Welcome back to the Averity podcast. Today we have Juliana, who is a labor and delivery unit nurse at one of the busiest hospitals in Miami. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So we're going to start off with, what's one thing people never expect when they come in to give birth?
When they come in to give birth, I feel that their doctors haven't really given them a rundown throughout the 9 months that they have, with their individual doctors. They're not really sure of the actual induction process. They're not sure of what medications we're about to use, for how long we're going to use them, what Pitocin actually does, when to expect the birth. They think that they're going to have the baby in an hour. I mean, some patients come in completely clueless of the actual induction process. Yeah. And that's one thing that I wish doctors would tell their patients, because, I want them to be educated and to be empowered in their own birth. But a lot of the times they come in and they don't really know what's going on.
I don't know the first thing about
Exactly.
birth.
But the thing, they've had 9 months of repair, and their doctors, I feel that, should have a responsibility to at least teach their patients the basics of what to expect when they come to the hospital.
Yeah.
But for the most part, that's kind of one of my favorite parts, is to sit down with my patients and explain to them from A to Z how we do things, why we do things. And I feel like it helps me as a nurse build rapport with my patients.
Of course, you're getting super personal with them.
Yes.
You're going into literally super private areas of their body.
Yes.
A super core memory moment where they're bringing life into this world.
Absolutely.
So that's amazing. But it's true. It's true. There are a lot of people that I don't know the first thing about birth. I've never had a baby. But it is scary to know that when the day comes, that there's doctors that aren't really educating their patients as far as like what to expect.
And not at all.
At all.
They will have had an appointment the day before they come to get induced, and they think they're having a baby that night. They don't have a single idea that they're probably going to have a baby in maybe 16 to 24 hours.
Yeah.
Or that they're not going to be able to eat. They think that they can eat throughout an induction process.
I actually didn't even know that.
They can't eat. As soon as you come into the hospital, we say, when was the last time you ate? Because when we start these medications, anything can go wrong, right? Anything can go wrong. The baby's heartbeat can decelerate, and we can have an emergency C-section at any time.
That's crazy.
And so if we're going to have you in the OR, we can't have food in the stomach nor fluids in the stomach. And
That's very true.
We don't allow patients to eat, but they don't even know that fact, that they can't eat once an induction begins. And
that just goes to show you that they really aren't educating the women as far as like what to expect, what's the process going to be like. And I feel like it could be very simple, even if they can make a little PDF and like take it, give it to them on their way out. Like, this is what's going to be your step-by-step expected process. There are emergencies, which obviously things, take a different route, but this is a guideline of what's unexpected from a healthy childbirth, right?
Exactly.
So do you know the average cost of a healthy, simple vaginal birth in the U.S.?
I actually have no idea.
So, and I guess that's where Averity comes in. A simple childbirth that's healthy, maybe just an epidural, no complications, God willing, easily could run you about $30,000. Easily. And that's without insurance. But of course, there's emergency cases where it could quickly double, triple, quadruple, depending on those emergency cases.
Oh, I'm sure.
How often do you have patients come in that are expecting to have a normal pregnancy, but then, or a normal birth, but then turn out being, this was an emergency?
Well, where I work is actually one of the highest C-section rates. When it comes to, even in the state of Florida, we have one of the highest C-section rates. So I would say if we deliver 450 patients a month,
that's crazy.
I would say over 300 are C-sections.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's
actually
like a baby mill.
It is. It is. We really are. We're like a baby factory.
Holy crap.
But I would, in the beginning when I first started this job, I was very surprised and very shocked at how many C-sections happened and occurred.
Yeah.
And now I feel like I'm, just desensitized, because you get to learn the doctors and who is pro C-section. I always say specific doctors that I work with should have just been plastic surgeons, because it feels like they're more pro C-section than they are vaginal birth.
Is C-section easier in the eyes of like a doctor than a vaginal birth?
1,000%. You come in, they only have to essentially be there for the surgery, which can take 30 minutes max if there's no complications, and they're out. So whereas a vaginal birth, you can be there for hours, 24 hours, 12 hours. Complications can arise. You're mitigating the Pitocin. I mean, a lot of that is our job, but we're constantly, contacting them.
Yeah.
They can be at home, but we're calling them every hour. And so there's a lot of lingering stress that happens with vaginal deliveries compared to a C-section. C-sections, if they're scheduled, they know when to come in 7:30. By 8 o'clock, they're finished.
So it's almost like they're more, it's easier for them to just like come in, get it done, and leave.
Absolutely.
Whereas, especially I feel like with doctors with a lot of time, they lose that emotional connection to their patients. They look at it more like a transaction. Whereas, you have to stay for 8 hours to do a vaginal birth. It's easier for them to just be like, let's just slice her open and just, take out the baby.
Absolutely. And obviously different doctors have different reports with their patients. I've seen a handful of them who really do build great relationships with their patients, and they do try and give the patient a chance. Whereas some of them are completely transactional. Some of them have only met that patient that for the first time there, because all of their prenatal care has been with their nurse practitioners or their nurses in the office, and they've actually haven't come face to face with these patients. So they have no emotional ties to the patient. And to them, it is a transaction.
Just another number.
It's just another number. And that makes me really sad to say. So those doctors that actually do build a rapport with their patients and have a relationship, those stand out.
Of course.
Those stand out.
Yeah, those
but it's really sad to say. I would say if I have 4 patients, I would say there's a 50% chance that 2 of those patients will be C-sections.
And going back to the insurance aspect, once a vaginal birth goes into the C-section, it easily costs over $50,000 or more, because now you're talking about the OR room. And for those of you that don't know this, everything in a hospital is like going to a restaurant. Everything costs money.
Itemized.
So it's everything itemized. So just like when you go to a restaurant where you're charged for the water, you're charged for the ketchup, you're charged for the soup, the spoon, whatever, you're charged for every little thing. It's the same thing in a hospital. You're charged for the hospital room that you're staying in. You're charged for the epidural that you're given. You're charged for the OR, the physician's fees, which are not included in the hospital fees. Physicians will have their own separate fee. The anesthesiologist has their own separate fee. So everything just starts adding up into these itemized bills. And I've seen a lot of TikToks, a lot of reels go viral lately about how it's really expensive. People are not really aware of how expensive that it could really turn out to be. And that's especially when it's, again, a simple, healthy vaginal or C-section. God forbid there's a lot of emergencies that then the baby is now in NICU. And that's a whole nother beast. A whole nother beast.
Yeah.
So
now when you mention that, though I don't have anything to do with the money aspect of a delivery or a C-section, we are responsible for the charges. So at the end of a delivery or a C-section, the nurses fill out charge sheets where we specify,
everything.
For example, in an OR, how many sutures were used, how many fluids of sterile water were used, how many laps, how many instruments, etc. If the patient needed Surgisil or Dermabond or something really specific in that surgery, I tally those things on the chart sheet, and I'm sure that's going directly to insurance companies to be charged.
Exactly.
So, even though we're not face to face with those charges, I technically am part of it because I am, tallying it up for the patient, and that can get really
very
expensive.
transactional. It's very, very transactional.
Yeah.
And things as far as even a Tylenol, I've seen ERs charge $80 to administer a Tylenol, which is absolutely crazy. And that's just a Tylenol. So going back to a birth, things can get very, very messy. I mean, an epidural, I don't know exactly off the top of my head right now, but an epidural can easily be over $3,000. Just the injection, not even talking about the actual syringe that you're using. Again, the room, the bedding, everything is charged. The bedding, everything. So again, going back to how quickly the costs do rise with a NICU, what's the longest you've ever seen a baby stay in the NICU?
Oh, maybe a month and a half, sometimes 2 months.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, if they're born with a lot of complications, respiratory issues. Luckily, we don't have that many complications, but we do have premature births, and that's just kind of, part of delivery.
Yeah.
I did have a patient who was in the hospital for more than a month with her baby in the NICU,
Wow.
and she was paying out of pocket.
Wow.
She was paying out of pocket. So I remember her mentioning, I never asked, it's not prudent to ask, but I do remember she was stressed about the money, and she was really hoping that the baby wouldn't. But the baby, unfortunately, she went into preterm labor, and it was more than a month that she was there for sure.
For sure. And like being conservative, one night in the hospital could easily be $3 to $4 to $5 grand.
Wow.
So multiply that by like a month or 2 months.
Yes.
The bills can get astronomically expensive. I've heard people say that the hospital is literally the most expensive hotel because it actually is. Like it actually is.
Yes.
How many of your patients come in with insurance? How many of them come in with no insurance?
So I would say almost all of them come in with insurance. I only know this because when they first come in, we ask them for ID and insurance. So those are the two things that they need for us to precept them into our system. So I think the most common used insurance I see is Oscar. Yeah. I think I see that with most of our triage patients that come in through triage and then get admitted as patients. Yeah. But I would say 99% have insurance. Yeah.
And Oscar is one of the insurance carriers that's on the marketplace. So it is offered to those people that are self-employed, independent. Oscar is not usually offered through work, so it's definitely based on income. That's totally, that's a separate conversation. That's from the Affordable Care Act. But Oscar does have, and being that we work with ACA, we work with Oscar. Oscar has plans that have an out-of-pocket of $10,000. Wow. Oscar has plans that have an out-of-pocket of $500. So there's people that can literally pay $500 for the birth, or they can pay $10,000 for the birth. It all depends on what plan the person is on. That comes into a whole separate topic for the person themselves, what they can afford monthly. Yeah. A lot of people choose to have like a cheaper plan, but what they don't know is that it's going to come with a higher out of pocket. So it might be cheaper in the short, in the closer end, but in the long run, you're going to end up paying a lot more money.
Absolutely.
So what about the outcome? What's the process like when you're getting ready to discharge them? When they're kind of wrapped up already, do you guys give them a bill? How does that work?
That is through the billing department. And because I'm in labor, so there's stages, right? So first we triage them, then they're in labor and delivery with us, and then we transfer the patients to postpartum where they stay for 2 days. So if there are any discharge instructions for the patient, it would be through postpartum. So I have no part of that whatsoever. Yeah. However, I do know that it would be through the billing department. So we would have nothing to do with
So I've heard of doctors, especially OBGYNs, charging their own fee to deliver a baby, completely unrelated to insurance. I've actually had a few of my clients tell me that their doctor charged them $500, $1,000, $1,500. And I'm like, what's this charge for? And they let me know, like, oh no, that's the doctor, his fee.
His
like
personal
to deliver
fee.
my baby. Like that's his
on
fee.
On top of what he gets from insurance, right?
On top, 100%. Especially, and the doctors that do that are the doctors that are, the higher rated ones, the ones that are most in demand, that everybody wants to get, booked with them because they have a better reputation of handling births. In this case, like you said, better quality. So I've heard stories of where those doctors will charge their own fee before the baby's actually born. Maybe at their last visit before they go in to give birth, they'll let them know like, hey, here's my fee to, deliver the baby. Right. And even though the person says, oh, but I have insurance, and the doctor's like, no, this is unrelated. Like this has nothing to do with your insurance. This is my fee to assist you with delivering your baby. That's interesting. What happens when, let's say that doctor's not available. Let's say that it's an emergency and that doctor's no longer, let's say he's out of the country or something. What happens in that case?
So in that case, we have what's called a hospitalist, which is an OBGYN who is on watch for 24 hours, for 12 hours, etc., in the hospital at all times. So if a patient is in spontaneous birth and they're their actual OBGYN can't make it, we would call the hospitalist to be in the room to deliver.
Wow.
We can deliver the babies, but just in case of emergencies, in case there's a complication in the birth, like a shoulder dystocia or whatever kind of emergency can happen, we always should have a doctor in the room to deliver the baby.
Imagine getting charged that fee of like, hey, I'm paying for this specific doctor, and you paid $1,500 for that specific doctor. Something happens, and then that doctor's not even
is going to actually deliver. And a lot of patients don't know that. A lot of patients come in thinking, oh, my doctor is going to deliver my baby, but actually doctors work in groups, and there's a different doctor on call every day. So just because you've been seeing Dr. A, maybe when you come in labor, if it's not scheduled, you come in on a Tuesday, that doctor's not going to be delivering your baby.
Right. There's always like my water broke at 3 a.m.
Exactly. So there's never a guarantee. And a lot of patients are actually surprised by that. They're like, my doctor's not here. And I'm like, no, your doctor's not on call today. They're actually not expecting that their doctor's not going to be there.
That's scary. I mean, this is, especially when you've been, like you said, you've been planning your pregnancy for 9 months with this one doctor. And then the most important day when the baby's about to get here, they're not available.
And they've never met this person.
Right. Which is even more scary. It's like, who is this person, going into my private areas, about to deliver this life-changing moment for not only for you, but bringing new life into the world. That's absolutely crazy to me.
There's actually another example. So we have patients who are with a particular group of doctors, but they're international patients. So they offer them an international package, and they come from Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, wherever it may be. They pay a package up front, cash.
Wow.
And do
these people have papers?
That's a good question. I think they have they're not American citizens, but they do have passports.
So it's people that kind of like come into the country to I want to give birth here.
Just have a baby. Exactly. Just have a baby. They have an Airbnb address. They're not here.
They're only faster way to get citizenship.
Exactly. For their babies. So they come here, deliver their babies, and a month later they leave. They have a month of postnatal care, and then they go back.
Wow.
So those patients I know pay cash. And I know that because a lot of them ask me like, oh, how much is this going to cost if they need an additional medication, or if their induction is going to be a little bit longer than expected, or if they do have an emergency C-section. I'm not sure what's covered under that package, but I do know that they ask. And if we make some sort of suggestion to the patients, they'll ask like, oh, I don't know if that's covered under my package.
Wow.
So those are interesting cases. And in that case, the doctor has to be the one to deliver, because they're paying so much money to that doctor to deliver their babies. The doctor has to come from home, even if they're not on call.
Yeah.
And if they don't make it, and the hospitalist has to be the one to deliver the baby,
I'm sure they have to break them off or something.
The hospitalist is going to get paid, not the actual doctor. So it just becomes a whole problem with money when those interactions are kind of commingled and mixed. But I do know that can be an issue. Doctors get very upset if they're not called when their international patients come in.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And that just kind of opens it kind of opens my eyes to much more of how transactional the health industry can actually be.
Which is why I think I love the nursing aspect so much more, because we have nothing to do with money. We're just building a rapport with our patient, making sure the patient's safe, making sure they deliver safely and their babies are okay. And I really value that, not having a part of that financial aspect in any way with the patient. Yeah.
No, of course, you kind of clean your hands off of it, and then you don't have to deal with the stress of it. But I mean, I can imagine that the person is paying this package, and then all of a sudden an emergency happens. Now the baby's in NICU. Exactly. Imagine those people that all of a sudden, and I wonder what happens in those cases, because technically they're not even from here. So even if they were to try to go after them with bills, do those bills ever really get paid? Exactly. So just imagine if something were to happen to those international patients, you're talking about a bill of easily over $100,000.
Easily.
And how many of them probably just dip and like
leave the country.
They leave the country, and I'm assuming at that rate, at that point, the hospital just kind of eats those charges. But surprisingly, I don't know if you know this, but a lot of it is again transactional. That if the person doesn't have insurance, or if it is a package, or even if their out of pocket is too high, if the person just calls the hospital, their billing department, and they just negotiate, it is literally a factor of like negotiating with them.
Right.
Just like, oh, I can't afford this. Can you guys knock some off? Give me a discount. I'm self-pay. I don't have insurance. And the hospital billing department will start lowering things, giving them discounts to bring down that price, because they rather collect some than none.
Nothing. Exactly. Absolutely.
So that's just crazy. But so I guess we can close things off. What is one piece of advice that you want to give new parents or anybody that is planning on getting pregnant or is currently expecting?
I would say do your own research. When you come into the labor room without knowing anything, it takes away your power. And I want women to be empowered when they're about to have a baby. So do your research. Know what you want. Do you want an epidural? Educate yourself on what an epidural is. How does it affect your baby? Do you want a C-section? You can have an elective C-section. It's an environment where it's more in control, right? Where less things can go wrong. And so I would definitely say educate yourself as a woman and as a mother about what an induction is. If your primary doctor is not educating you on an induction, I do my best to educate my patients, but there's only so much we can do in the short amount of time that I do have them. So I would love if people came into the labor room already knowing what they want, how they want it. I love those empowered moms that come in with a birth plan. I'm like, yes, you know exactly
what does a birth plan look like?
It's, I want the cord to not be cut until a minute. I want skin to skin immediately with my child. I don't want certain medications for my baby. I don't want Hep B. I don't want erythromycin. Some
like the vaccinations.
Exactly. Wow. Some moms want them, some don't. And it's really all up to the mother. But if you come in not knowing what to expect, you're gonna feel kind of pressure to make a quick decision without thinking about it.
Right. And so, you don't really know if that decision is for your own good.
Exactly.
Because, and I think that goes hand in hand and with like how much us as like living in America, we put this blind trust into the medical system.
Oh yeah,
like
very.
Especially going with like our first doctor, the first OBGYN. I'm sure that there's a lot of women that just like, well, this is the OBGYN that's in my network, so I'm going to go to that one.
Yes.
They don't do their research of like who's a better qualified OBGYN, who's not. We just kind of like trust blindly in their recommendations.
Yeah.
And just what you said in the beginning is like super eye-opening of like if the doctor decides that he wants to leave early and wants to cut you open just to get the baby out faster.
Oh yeah.
And we have a say whether that happens or not.
Yes,
so I think that's very enlightening.
Exactly.
But no, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing the afternoon with us. I learned a lot today. I hope that everybody who's watching this also learned a lot. For the day that I eventually do have a kid, this is very enlightening, and I'll be sure to do my own research.
And I'll be your nurse, so don't worry.
Well, thank you guys. Stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
And stay tuned for the next one. Bye.
Bye.